We all think we know what lying is right. I mean, like it's when you say something you know isn't true to mislead someone. But, I was doing some reading in philosophy, and it turns out defining what a lie is a really tricky philosophical problem. And so that's what we're going to be getting into today on the Deep Dive. Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at how philosophers think about and define lying. And this is something that, philosophers have been thinking about for a long time.
Yeah.
And this is a deep dive specifically tailored for you, a philosopher or someone interested in the philosophical debates around lying.
Exactly. We're going to be taking apart the philosophy of lying.
Yeah.
And our guide today will be the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, entry on the definition of lying and deception. It's a huge resource that gives a comprehensive overview of all the different ways philosophers have thought about lying.
Yeah. So our mission, if you choose to accept it, is to go deep
Yeah.
and try to understand all the complexities of defining a lie from a philosophical perspective.
Right.
We're going to look at all the different arguments and the little distinctions that philosophers make, and hopefully we'll learn something new and interesting.
Hopefully.
So where should we start with this? What's the best place to begin when thinking about how to define a lie?
Well, I think the best place to begin is with what philosophers call the traditional definition of lying. And that's something like the definition you'd find in a dictionary. So like a false statement made with the intention to deceive. However, the Stanford entry points out some problems with this definition. It's too narrow because it requires that the statement be false. But like, what if someone believes something's false, but it turns out to be true? Like, are they lying?
Yeah.
And also it's too broad because it includes like, you could be lying about something that you didn't say. Or like, I could be lying to people I didn't intend to lie to.
Right. So it seems like the dictionary definition is a good starting point,
Right.
but it's not quite precise enough for philosophers.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's a better, more precise definition that philosophers typically work with?
So a common definition of lying is what the Stanford entry calls L1. And this one's been defended by a lot of philosophers like Eisenberg and Primoratz. And it goes something like this. Lying is making a statement that the speaker believes to be false to another person with the intention that that other person believes it to be true. So you can see that this definition has a lot more detail, and it takes into account the beliefs of the speaker and the beliefs of the person they're talking to.
Right. So this definition, L1, is the more sophisticated version that philosophers have come up with.
Yeah.
And it's made up of a bunch of different parts, right?
It,
It seems like there are 4 conditions that need to be met for something to be a lie.
exactly.
So let's break down these 4 conditions, starting with the statement condition.
Yeah.
What is the statement condition?
So for L1 to apply, the liar has to make a statement. And the important thing here is that the word statement implies using conventional signs or symbols to communicate something. So that means things like language, but also other systems of communication with agreed upon meanings like sign language, Morse code, or even certain gestures. The thing that philosophers are trying to get at here is the difference between these conventional symbols, which is what they call symbols, and natural signs, what they call indices.
Okay.
So like smoke is a natural sign of fire. A photograph is an icon. So it's a sign by resemblance. It resembles the thing that it's a sign of.
Right. So wearing a wig to look younger or faking a limb to gain sympathy, those aren't statements under this condition, so they wouldn't be considered lying even if they're deceptive.
Right, because those aren't using established shared symbols to make a claim.
Okay.
Same thing with wearing a wedding ring when you're not married or wearing a uniform that you didn't earn.
Right.
Those are deceptive, but they don't fit the statement condition of L1. So what L1's getting at is that it has to be communication through agreed upon symbols that make something a lie.
That's really interesting. So, what about things like exclamations of surprise or rhetorical questions? Do those fall under this statement condition?
Well, usually no. So like if I shout surprise or if I ask a rhetorical question, I'm not making a statement that can be true or false in the way that L1 requires. But the Stanford entry does mention that some philosophers have suggested that maybe we can think of statements in a broader way.
I see. So a statement means something that can be true or false that's communicated using symbols.
Yeah.
Okay. But what about like irony or jokes or actors in a play?
Uh-huh.
They say things that are untrue all the time, but we don't consider them liars.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it brings up something really important about the statement condition of L1. It doesn't require that the speaker believes the statement is true, or that they want the audience to believe it, or even that they want the audience to believe that they believe it. So an ironic statement, or a joke, or lines in a play, those are all still statements for L1. But the intention to deceive condition is what will differentiate these from lies.
Got it. So just saying something untrue isn't enough for it to be a lie.
Uh-huh.
Now, what about staying silent when you should speak up? What about lies of omission?
Yeah. So under L1, omissions don't count as making a statement. So if you don't say something that's relevant, that's not a lie, according to L1, the exception to this would be if there's like a pre-existing agreement or a context where silence means something specific. So the Stanford entry gives the example of a potential juror who didn't say anything during questioning, and that was understood as a statement that was false. So he was convicted of perjury for staying silent.
Wow, that's really interesting. So in that case, staying silent actually constituted a lie.
Yep. Yeah. And that just shows how the context can sometimes make silence into a statement.
That's really fascinating. Okay, so we talked about the first condition, the statement condition. Now, what about the untruthfulness condition? What does it mean for a statement to be untruthful?
So the untruthfulness condition says that for something to be a lie, the speaker has to believe that it's false. So it's really important for philosophers to make this distinction between what the speaker believes and whether or not the statement is actually true or false. You could say something false without lying if you believe that it's true. So the Stanford entry gives the example of George W. Bush claiming that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. If he believed that, then he wasn't lying, even though it turned out to be false.
Right. It all comes down to the speaker's belief.
Exactly.
And this also means that you can lie even if what you say is true, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit counterintuitive.
It is. But a famous example of that comes from Sartre's story, The Wall. In the story, Pablo lies to his captors and tells them that his friend is hiding in a particular place, and he fully intends for them to believe this lie. But unbeknownst to Pablo, his friend has actually moved to that location. So the statement is true, but Pablo believed it was false when he said it, and he intended to deceive his captors. So under L1, this would count as a lie.
So even though what Pablo said was true, because he believed it was false and he was trying to deceive his captors, L1 would say that he was lying.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So the untruthfulness condition is all about whether the speaker believes the statement is false.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's actually true or false in the real world.
Yeah.
What about when you say something that's true, but you intend to mislead through implication, like when you tell a poulter or a double bluff?
That's a great question. And under L1, these kinds of statements would not be considered lies because the speaker doesn't believe that what they are saying is false. So imagine someone asks if you worked on a project recently and you say, well, I was really focused on other priorities. And you're trying to conceal that you secretly sabotaged the project. What you said is true. You were focused on other priorities. But you're saying it in a way that's designed to mislead. L1 says this isn't a lie because you didn't say anything that you believe to be false. Same thing with double bluffs. So a double bluff is when you say something true, but you want the listener to think that it's false. And again, L1 says this isn't a lie because you didn't say anything that you believe to be false.
That's so tricky. So you can be super deceptive.
Yeah.
Without technically lying according to this definition.
Exactly.
What if you believe a statement is neither true nor false? Can you lie by saying it?
So according to L1, no. Because if you don't believe it's true and you don't believe it's false, then you can't believe it's false. The Stanford entry uses the example of a beggar who says, I lost my job.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't believe this is true and he doesn't believe it's false. He just says it to get money. Even though he's trying to get people to believe something false, he's not lying under L1 because he doesn't believe the statement is false.
Interesting. What about metaphors? Can you lie using a metaphor?
That's a really interesting question, and it's something that philosophers are still debating. So if you say something like, his arguments were as solid as a house of cards, and you actually believe that his arguments are really strong, then you could be lying. But it depends on whether you believe that the statement, his arguments were as solid as a house of cards, is false, and whether you intended to deceive someone by saying it. So it's complicated.
Yeah, metaphors are hard. Okay, so that was a lot about the untruthfulness condition. So basically, it just matters whether the speaker believes this statement is false. It doesn't matter if it's actually true or false. Now let's move on to the third condition, the addressee condition. So who has to be on the receiving end of a false statement for it to count as a lie?
Okay, so L1 says that you have to be making the untruthful statement to another person. Or more specifically, you have to believe that you're making the statement to another person.
Okay.
This is because it's possible to make a mistake and think that you're talking to a person when you're actually not. Like imagine trying to lie to a mannequin.
Right.
So what this means is that you can't lie to yourself in the same way that you lie to others.
Okay.
And you also can't lie to someone who you think is just listening in on your conversation with someone else, like if they're eavesdropping.
So let's say two people are having a conversation and they know that someone else is listening in.
Yeah.
And one of them says something false to deceive the eavesdropper.
Right.
Would L1 say that's a lie?
So that's what philosophers call bogus disclosure. And it's one of the problems that people point out with L1, because a lot of people would say that this counts as lying to the eavesdropper. But L1 says no, because the eavesdropper is not the person being addressed in the conversation. Now, L1 does say that you can lie to a general audience. So like if you publish something that's false or send a mass email that's false, then that's lying to your audience.
So that makes sense. There's a difference between lying to a specific person and lying to, like, the public.
Right.
Okay, now what about the kind of addressee? Does the addressee have to be a certain type of being for it to count as a lie?
Yes. So L1 says that the addressee has to be someone that the speaker believes can understand the statement and can form beliefs based on it. So this means that you can't lie to a goldfish or a baby
Okay.
because they can't understand what you're saying. And you probably can't lie to someone who's in a coma either.
Right.
But you could lie to someone through a non-person. So like you could lie to a bank by entering false information into an ATM. Because the bank is a person, even though the ATM is not.
Right.
So L1 says that's a lie.
Okay, so that's the addressee condition. There has to be a person that the speaker believes can understand what they're saying. Now let's move on to the fourth and final condition. The intention to deceive the addressee condition.
Okay.
So this is probably the most intuitive part of what it means to lie right.
Yeah, I think so.
You're trying to trick someone
Right.
into believing something that isn't true.
Right.
So what exactly does this condition say?
So the intention to deceive the addressee condition says that the speaker has to intend for the addressee to believe that the statement is true. So this is the part of L1 that distinguishes lies from other things that might involve saying something false, like irony jokes, fiction, or acting. In all these cases, you're saying something that isn't true. But you don't intend for the audience to believe that it's true.
Right. Like if someone's telling a joke, you know that they're not actually trying to convince you that what they're saying is true. What about white lies or altruistic lies? Do they count as lies under L1?
So usually no, because with white lies and altruistic lies, you're not trying to get the person to believe that the statement is true. So let's say your friend gets a terrible haircut and they ask you what you think, and you say, "It looks great." You're not trying to get them to believe that the haircut looks great. You're just trying to be nice. So that's a white lie, and it wouldn't count as a lie under L1.
Okay.
Or let's say you're trying to convince someone that something is true and you know that they're very suspicious. So you tell them the opposite of what you want them to believe, hoping that they'll disbelieve you and believe the truth.
Right.
So even though you said something that you believe to be false, you're not trying to get them to believe that statement. So it wouldn't be a lie under L1.
So with L1, it really matters what your intention is? Like you're not just trying to get them to believe something false. You're trying to get them to believe a specific thing that you said that you believe is false.
Exactly. And another important point is that it doesn't matter whether the person you're lying to actually believes you or not. So like a lie that fails is still a lie. It doesn't have to be successful to be a lie.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about all four of the conditions for L1.
Yeah.
The statement condition, the untruthfulness condition, the addressee condition, and the intention to deceive the addressee condition. And I think we both agree that it's a really useful definition,
Yeah.
but it's not without its problems.
Right.
So what are some of the objections that philosophers have raised against L1?
So there are two main kinds of objections that philosophers have raised against L1. Some people think that L1 is too narrow. So they think that one or more of the conditions isn't actually necessary for something to be a lie. And then some people think that L1 is too broad. So they think that even if all four conditions are met, it still might not be a lie.
Okay, so let's start with the two narrow objections.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that people say are missing from L1?
Well, one objection is to the statement condition. So some philosophers think that lying can happen through any behavior that's intended to give false information or to withhold true information. So it doesn't have to involve an actual statement with symbols. Like, for example, if I know that you're about to go on vacation and I secretly let the air out of your tires so that you miss your flight, I've definitely done something wrong and I intended to deceive you, but I didn't make a statement. So according to L1, I didn't lie.
Right, but that seems like it should count as lying.
Yeah, and that's what some philosophers argue. They think that the important thing is that you're trying to get someone to believe something false, whether it's through words or actions.
Okay, so those are the objections to the statement condition. Now, what about the untruthfulness condition?
Yeah.
Surely a lie has to be untrue.
Well, that's what you might think.
Yeah.
But there are some interesting objections to the untruthfulness condition. So some people argue that if you say something with the intention to deceive, then it's a lie, even if it turns out to be true. We saw this with the search, for example.
Right.
And then there's something called conversational implicature. So this is where you say something true, but you imply something false.
Okay.
So let's say your friend asks you if you like their new shoes, and you say, well, they're very unique.
Right.
And you actually think the shoes are hideous. So you've said something true, but you've implied something false. And some philosophers would say that this is a lie.
Interesting.
And then there's the idea of lying ironically. So this is where you say something untrue, but you do it in a way that makes it clear that you don't believe it.
Uh-huh.
And again, some philosophers would say that this is a lie. And finally, some people argue that you don't have to believe that the statement is definitely false to lie. You could just believe that it's probably false.
All right, so there are all these different ways that you can be deceptive with your language without saying something that you believe to be definitively false.
Exactly.
Okay, now what about the addressee condition? Can you lie without directing your statement to a specific person?
So there are a couple of objections to the addressee condition. One is that you might be able to lie to yourself. So you might have some internal thought that you don't believe,
Right.
and that could be a lie.
Okay.
And another objection is that you might be able to lie to a third party even if you're not talking to them directly. So this is the bogus disclosure case we were talking about earlier, where you're talking to one person, but you're intending to deceive someone else who's listening in.
Right.
And then there's some even more radical ideas like maybe you could lie to a dog or a really sophisticated AI,
Right.
or maybe you could lie to someone who doesn't understand language like a baby.
Okay.
So all of these are cases where the addressee is not a person who can understand the statement. And some philosophers would say that you can still lie in these cases.
So that brings us to the last condition,
Hmm.
the intention to deceive, the addressee condition.
Right.
So what are the objections to that condition?
Well, one objection is that you might be able to lie by deceiving someone about your own beliefs. So you might say something true, but you want the person to think that you believe it's false.
Right.
So you're deceiving them about your beliefs, but not about the truth of the statement itself. And then there are some philosophers who think that you don't need to have any intention to deceive at all to lie. So they think that lying is just about saying something that you believe to be false, regardless of whether you want to deceive anyone.
Okay, so that was a lot about the two narrow objections. Now, what about the two broad objections?
Yeah.
What are some examples where all four conditions of L1 seem to be met, but it doesn't really feel like a lie?
Okay, so one objection is that the statement has to be actually false for it to be a lie. L1 doesn't actually say this. It just says that the speaker has to believe that it's false. But some people think that it has to be actually false to count as a lie.
Okay.
And then another objection is that it's not enough to intend that the other person believes the statement. You have to intend that they believe that you believe it. So if you're just trying to get someone to believe something, regardless of whether you believe it or not, then that might not count as a lie.
Okay.
And then a final objection is that you have to make an assertion for something to be a lie. So this means that ironic lies and joke lies and things like that wouldn't count as lies
Right.
because they're not assertions.
So basically the idea is that there are cases where you can say something false and intend for someone to believe it, but it's not really a lie because you're not really asserting anything.
Right.
So that brings us to a major division in the philosophy of lying between deceptionism and non-deceptionism.
Yes.
What's the difference between these two views?
So the basic difference is this. Deceptionists think that the intention to deceive is essential for something to be a lie. Non-deceptionists think that you can lie without intending to deceive.
Okay. And are there different kinds of deceptionism and non-deceptionism?
Yeah. So within deceptionism, there are three main views.
Okay.
There's simple deceptionism, complex deceptionism, and moral deceptionism. So simple deceptionism is basically just L1.
Got it.
It says that lying is making a statement that you believe to be false with the intention to deceive.
Okay.
Complex deceptionism adds some extra conditions to L1. So, for example, some complex deceptionists think that you have to make an assertion for something to be a lie, and some complex deceptionists think that lying involves a breach of trust.
Okay.
So it's not just about saying something false.
Right.
It's about violating a norm of communication.
Okay.
And then moral deceptionism says that lying is not just about deception.
Right.
It's also about doing something morally wrong.
Okay, so that's deceptionism. Now, what about non-deceptionism?
Yeah, so there are two main kinds of non-deceptionism.
Okay.
There's simple non-deceptionism and complex non-deceptionism. Simple non-deceptionism is the view that lying is just saying something that you believe to be false. You don't have to intend to deceive anyone, but this view is not very popular. Most philosophers think that you have to do something more than just say something false to lie.
Oh.
So the more popular view is complex non-deceptionism.
All right.
And there are two main types of complex non-deceptionism.
Okay.
There's the warranting view and the assertion view.
Okay.
So the warranting view says that lying is about warranting something that's false. So this means that you're presenting yourself as guaranteeing the truth of something even though you don't believe it.
Okay.
So for example, if you're a student and the teacher asks you if you cheated on the test and you say no even though you did, you're warranting the truth of the statement, I didn't cheat on the test, even though you know it's false.
Right.
And according to the warranting view, that's a lie.
Okay, so it's about guaranteeing the truth of something that you don't believe.
Exactly.
Now, what about the assertion view?
So the assertion view says that lying is about asserting something that you don't believe.
Okay.
So this means that you have to be making a statement that's intended to be taken as true. So for example, if you're a doctor and you're undercover and someone asks you what you do and you say, I'm a gardener, that would be a lie, according to the assertion view.
Okay.
Because you're making a statement that you intend for the person to believe even though you don't believe it yourself.
So both of these views, the warranting view and the assertion view, say that lying is about doing something more than just saying something false.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about doing something with your language that violates a norm of communication.
Right.
Okay, so that was a lot about lying. Now let's talk about deception.
Okay.
Is deception the same thing as lying?
So deception is a broader concept than lying. Lying is a type of deception, but not all deception is lying.
Okay.
So the dictionary definition of deception is to cause to believe what is false. But philosophers think that this definition is too broad because you could cause someone to believe something false without intending to.
Right, like if you just make a mistake.
Exactly. So philosophers think that deception has to be intentional, and they often use the word mislead to cover cases where someone causes someone else to believe something false, either intentionally or unintentionally.
Okay, so for philosophers, deception has to be intentional.
Right.
What's a good definition of deception then?
So a good definition of deception is intentionally causing someone to have a false belief that you yourself know or believe to be false.
Okay.
So there are a few things to notice about this definition.
Yeah.
First, it doesn't require a statement, so you can deceive someone without saying anything.
Right.
Second, the statement doesn't have to be untrue, so you can deceive someone by saying something true.
Yeah.
And third, there's no requirement for a specific addressee, so you might intend to deceive anyone who happens to be watching you.
So basically, deception is a much broader category than lying.
Right.
What are some examples of deception that wouldn't count as lying?
Well, one example is deceiving someone with an index. So an index is a sign that's caused by the thing that it signifies. So for example, smoke is an index of fire.
Right.
So you could deceive someone by lighting a fire to make them think that something is burning when it's not.
Okay.
Or you could deceive someone with an icon.
Oh.
So an icon is a sign that resembles the thing that it signifies.
Right.
So you could deceive someone by using a fake ID or a disguise.
Okay.
And you can also deceive someone by omission. So this is where you leave out important information that would change someone's beliefs. And L1 says that omission isn't lying, but it can be deception.
Okay.
And you can also deceive someone by paltering or double bluffing. So as we said before, paltering and double bluffing involve saying something true, but intending to imply something false. And L1 says that these aren't lies, but they can be deception.
Okay.
And finally, you can deceive someone by telling them a joke or being ironic. So if you say something that's obviously false, but you do it in a way that makes it clear that you don't believe it, then you might still be deceiving someone.
Right, because they might not get the joke.
Exactly.
Okay, so there are all these different ways to deceive someone without lying.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are there any objections to this definition of deception?
Yes. So one objection is that you don't have to believe that the false belief is false to deceive someone. So you might just be reckless or indifferent to whether it's true or false.
Okay.
And another objection is that deception isn't just about creating new false beliefs. It's also about getting someone to hold on to a false belief that they already have.
Okay.
And another objection is that the false belief has to be caused by evidence that was created by the deceiver, so you can't just take advantage of a pre-existing false belief.
Okay.
And then there's negative deception, which is causing someone to lose a true belief or preventing them from gaining a true belief. And some philosophers think that this counts as deception, but others don't.
Okay.
And then there's the question of whether deception by omission really counts as deception.
Right.
And finally, some people argue that deception doesn't have to be intentional.
It seems like deception is just as complicated as lying. There are all these different philosophical views about what it means to deceive someone. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the traditional definition of lying, L1, and the 4 conditions that need to be met for something to be a lie. The statement condition, the untruthfulness condition, the addressee condition, and the intention to deceive, the addressee condition. We've also talked about some of the objections to L1 and the 2 main views on lying, deceptionism and non-deceptionism. And finally, we've talked about the definition of deception and how it's different from lying.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key takeaways from this episode?
Well, one key takeaway is that lying is a really complex concept. It's not as simple as just saying something false. There are all these different factors that philosophers consider when they're trying to define lying.
Right.
And another key takeaway is that there's no one right answer to the question of what lying is. There are a lot of different philosophical views, and they all have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
So it's up to each individual to decide which definition of lying they find most convincing.
So basically, it's complicated.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the philosophy of lying.
Thanks for having me.
And one last thought for you, our listeners. Given everything we've talked about today, do you think that our everyday understanding of lying is accurate? Or is it more complicated than we think? Think about it.
Yeah, that's a good question.
All right, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.